beginning of a special day in Miss Norton's class. The first book reports of the semester were going to be given. Jim was looking forward to them. His report wasn't due until next week. At the front of the room was Fred. He was going to give his report today. Fred's book was about baseball.
It's part about the World Series. Matt, the homer with the bases loaded in the last half of the ninth, too.
It seemed that Fred was going to give a good book report. Jim hoped he'd be able to give a good report, too. He had a book he wanted everyone to enjoy, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Jim wanted to be able to share the book with his whole class, just as Fred wanted to. Later in the morning, Fred gave his report, but something was wrong.
It's about a lot of teams and how this one guy, he's a hero, and how he won a World Series, and how he won it for his team.
Was he reporting on the same exciting book he had told his friends about before? The class didn't think the report was very interesting.
And, well, it's an exciting book, and I liked it.
When Fred came to the end of his report, and Mrs. Norton asked if anyone had any questions, no one did. There was nothing anyone wanted to discuss about Fred's book. At lunchtime, Fred talked about his report to Jim.
Nobody thought my book report was very interesting.
The part you told about before school sounded good.
Yes, Fred knew that part of the report well, but he couldn't remember the rest. Jim felt sorry for Fred, but would he be able to do any better? Well, he would certainly try. At home, a few days later, Jim had finished reading Tom Sawyer and began to plan his book report. He had already made out his library file card. It told the author's name, the title of the book, and that it was fiction. Then, what the book was about, and Jim's opinion of the book. At the bottom was his name. Jim had checked for errors in spelling and grammar. He wanted his card to be just right. Cards like this helped the class choose books. Now, could Jim plan his report so he could avoid Fred's mistakes? He tried to remember back to the day when Fred had given his report. Before class that day, Fred had told about an incident in his book so well that his friends had been very interested in it. But later, in front of the class, it was easy to see that Fred's full report hadn't been well prepared. Jim decided he would have to be well prepared if he wanted the class to share the enjoyment of his book. So he organized his report. He made an outline, a brief list of points that would help remind him of the information that should be in his report. First, he would tell the title of the book and the author, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, the pen name of Samuel L. Clemens. Then he would tell the subject of the book, what it was about. He had told briefly what the book was about on the card for the room library file, but for his report, Jim thought he should tell more. He pictured Tom Sawyer and his friends as they played along the Mississippi River more than 100 years ago. Jim would tell some of the adventures Tom had and some of the pranks he played. But Jim wouldn't tell too much. That would spoil the book for those who wanted to read it. He would just hint at some of Tom's adventures. He would tell about life on the Mississippi River, how Tom attended his own funeral, and what happened to him in the cave. Jim decided he would tell something about the main characters, too. He had grown to know them so well. He hoped he could make them as real to the class as they were for him. Two of the most interesting characters in the book were Tom and Aunt Polly. Jim also wanted to tell at least one interesting incident. There were many good ones to choose from, but he knew which one he especially wanted to talk about. Yes, this one. How Tom whitewashed the fence. Tom Sawyer had been able to get his friends to pay to do his own work for him. In a very amusing way, he convinced them that hard work was really fun. Yes, Jim would enjoy telling about this incident. So that he would be sure to remember this incident, he made a note in the outline. At the end of his report, Jim wanted to give his opinion of the book. He had enjoyed the book very much and felt it was worth reading. If only he could share his enjoyment with the class. By following this outline, Jim would be able to remember everything he wanted to say in front of the class. He had organized all the information for his report. But was that enough? Was there anything else he could do to help him be sure of giving a good report? Jim remembered that when you give a report, people are looking at you. He wanted to make a good appearance. He thought of the way Fred had looked when he gave his report. Not too good. Jim stood up straight. But would he remember to stand that way in class? His father said it might help Jim give a better report in class if he practiced giving it at home in front of the family. Jim thought that might be a good idea. His mother and father and sister were happy to listen to his book report. They helped Jim remember to stand up straight and speak distinctly in complete sentences. Jim was careful to use correct English. He spoke with expression, so that what he said was interesting. He wanted to be able to hold the attention of the whole class. When he had finished practicing his report, his family showed how much they had enjoyed it. Now, if he could just do as well in school. The next day in class, it was Jim's turn to give his book report. He was well prepared. He turned in his library file card and then began.
Would you like to meet a boy who could get you to do his work for him and still make you think it was fun? You can meet him in the book called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Samuel L. Clemens, whose pseudonym is Mark Twain. This book is fiction. It's about the adventures of some people who lived in a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River more than 100 years ago. The adventures they have are often funny and sometimes very exciting. Can you imagine what would happen if you turned up at your own funeral, or what it would be like to be lost in a large cave? You can find out by reading this book. The main character, of course, is Tom Sawyer. Without even trying, he could get himself into more trouble, and then, just as fast, he would be out of it again. Tom was an orphan who lived with his Aunt Polly. She often punished him because she really loved him so much. She really did. But Tom had a way of getting around his Aunt Polly. Once she wanted him to whitewash a fence. That's the job of something like painting a fence. Tom wanted to whitewash the fence, but while he was working, some of his friends came by.
Jim's book report was given so well that it was attracting the interest of the whole class. They were sharing Jim's book with him.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Point by point, Jim followed his outline until his report was finished. When it was time for questions, many wanted to know more about the book. The book report had made it sound so interesting. Some of the class had learned that the book was worth reading. Mrs. Norton thought it was a fine report. Some too. And when Mrs. Norton asked the class if they would like to dramatize the whitewashing incident, everyone thought it was a fine idea. You can be sure Jim was pleased. All that preparation had really been worthwhile. He had shared his book with the whole class by making a good book report.